You're listening to the Strategically podcast. I'm Tyler Collins.
And I'm Brandon Collins. We like to say that strategy is all about finding the best way to get from where you are to where you want to be.
Head over to our website, Strategically, that's strategic.li, for more tools and content. But right now, you can join us for this casual conversation where we dive deep into the concepts behind thinking strategically in life, business, or whatever you care about.
In this episode, we start off by exploring an important question. What do we mean when we say strategy? We look at several common false ideas about strategy and a few things that often hold people back from being more strategic. We also address one of the most common critiques of thinking strategically. Is it possible to think strategically and still be spontaneous? Let's get into it.
What are we trying to cover in this episode, Brandon?
So I thought since last time we kind of covered our target for the book, the theme of the book, I thought this time it might be good to just describe or dig into a little bit what we mean when we say strategy, because I think there's a lot of misrepresentations or misnomers people have associated in their minds when we say the word strategy. And since we're going to be using that word a lot, I think it's a good place to go next.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So, because we're going to be saying, well, I just said it. This is going to be a casual conversation about strategy.
Yeah.
Which maybe doesn't make none of those words make sense to you when I put them together like that.
Like casual and strategy,
yes,
right?
Exactly. All right. So do you have a page that we're going to jump into first?
I do. So if you pull up the introduction, and just to remind everybody who's following along, so in our Let's Write series, we actually both split up when we first started working on this project, and we put together each of us put together an outline of how we thought about strategy and how it's done. And so that's what you're looking at here. This is our current outline. So I thought today what we could do is just talk through it a little bit and push back, evaluate, are these statements accurate? What's missing, that kind of a thing, especially as it comes to defining strategy. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's a great place to start. Okay. As we've talked through this, I have this feeling that you and I know exactly what we mean, but we've had a really hard time like defining it for other people. Like when I've had conversations telling other people what we're working on, what we're doing, I always am like, blah, 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 like,
yeah.
I just use random words, and I get the sense that, their eyes just glass over, and they're
you
like,
get that glazed over look,
like they're distant.
And you're not sure. For me, I'm never sure if it's because I'm doing a poor job communicating, or they just don't know what I mean when I say those words. Like, why would you get excited about strategy? That doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And it's probably both. Like, they probably don't know what we mean, and we're probably doing just an awful job at explaining.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe that's a good place to start, is some misconceptions. So I jotted some bullets down here. This is what I think people hear or think of or visualize when they think of strategy. If you said, oh, he's a strategic thinker, or, what's your strategy for accomplishing something? I think depending on the context, like some things that come to mind, I think people think of like chess, like board games, war games, things that are sort of complicated. And if it's complicated, you need a strategy, but maybe if it's not complicated, you don't. And I think that sort of lends itself to a very, almost nerdy, sort of heady, like you have to be a genius, you have to wear glasses and like have studied, calculus or something. Like you have to be like Sherlock Holmes is a perfect example. Like, how in those movies, well, in any of the like representations on television, like Sherlock Holmes, he's always like several steps ahead. I think that's how people think about strategy. Like you have to be smart enough to know what's going to happen and then like be multiple steps ahead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I do think there's a lot of connection between strategy and games. And in fact, our name Fireside Strat, the word, the like slang strat comes from speedrunning, I believe, is where I hear it the most. I'm sure other people use it, but
even that's real-time strategy games too.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So definitely the idea of strategy is most closely related to video games, board games, definitely business for sure. You think about business plans, business strategies, probably people talk about that kind of thing a lot. And it's not like we're not saying it isn't that.
That's right.
I think what we're saying is it's more than that. So for example, you could have a strategy for how to get through college, which that's like maybe a weird thing to think about. But what made me think of it is my wife, who like did a bunch of college courses her senior year, and then she went to community college for a year to get all of her like prerequisites done.
Yeah.
And then she was able to graduate in 3 years. Then she went to the college that she wanted to go to, but only for 2 years. So she was able to get through all of her classes and everything in just 3 years. That's a strategy. You know, there was a plan, a system, and that they, her and her mom like worked through and they put in place. But no more. I don't think people would think about that as necessarily a strategy, but that's exactly what it was. It was a strategy to get through college in 3 years to save money.
And that's interesting, like that you bring that up, because I just realized. So when I finished my degree, I started my degree in one school, and then I did online learning through a separate school. And as I was doing online learning, I had a job. I was married at the time. I had other things I was working towards. So school was just one part of my life. And that became part of my strategy, was like, hey, I need to pass this class, but I don't need an A. Like, I don't need to be amazing, you know, like, so there was actually part of my strategy was like, how hard should I work on this to balance it with the other areas of my life? That's really interesting as an example.
I really like this illustration of college, because I think that it's a good illustration of what we're really trying to help people with. So if you're watching this, because I think most people, the assumption is I go to school for 4 years, I pay X number of dollars, I get my degree, I go get my job. Yeah. And we're trying, it's not that that's bad, but that is a strategy. Whether you realize it or not, you are following a strategy. It might be the strategy that everybody uses, but that is one. And like you were pointing out, and I was pointing out, there's other ways to go about college, depending on what your goals are. Like in your example, you were saying, hey, I am focusing on this career that I'm working on, but I know I need to finish my degree. So I'm going to do both of those things at the same time, which then changed how you looked at your classes. It changed, you know, the schools that you went to. Like you started at one school and then you finished at another school. You thought, okay, I know I don't have time to go after a 4.0. So how much energy can I actually put in so I can still pass my classes, learn what I need to learn, but not put all of my energy into this, because I actually have more important things that I want to work on. So that, I feel like that's a good explanation. And, you know, getting back to our definition here, I feel like the best way to define these things is like illustrations, which again, just shows that we haven't really found the right words yet to describe what we're talking about. But as you've seen in that illustration, and we could talk about maybe in some other illustrations, we're talking about getting from point A to point B in maybe an efficient way. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah. So before we jump into that, so I just jotted down something you ended on there. I think is exactly right, which is strategic thinking is one of the best ways to break out of the box of sameness. Like most, like the examples we gave about college, like most people do college in one way, and it's easy to start to think that's the only right way to do college. When in reality, there's so many other ways to do it. So strategic thinking is a great way to realize, hey, it's not always the same for everyone. And that's a good thing. That's okay. But then the question becomes, how do you make those choices if you're not just following what the common wisdom is? So getting back to what you said, yes, strategy is about how to go from point A to point B. I wrote this down. If you see the bold, where strategy is bold, like two bullets down there, it's the reasons behind the choices you make in order to achieve your objective. Oops, that's supposed to say objective, not object.
I got you.
I just did it. We both did it. I'm interested to see what happens. Okay. So the reasons behind. So what's interesting about that is it's not the actual choices, right?
Yeah.
Is there a consistent reasoning behind those choices? That is your strategy. So for example, you know, to go back to the college illustration, I might pass a test with a B. I might choose to only study enough to pass a class with a B. That's that choice in and of itself is not a strategy. It's why did you make that choice? What was behind your thinking? And I think the what was behind it question is often where people don't even go. They think the choice is the strategy, or they have intuition about what's behind it, but they haven't actually thought about it. So another example, if you think of, like, I wrote the word defensive. So what are areas where you might have a defensive strategy? So like I'm thinking sports, you might have a more defensive strategy, or board games like chess, you can have a more defensive strategy. Fighting, video games, you can play more defensive. And what does that mean? That means not each individual play, but all those plays are aligned around a common theme, and the theme is defensiveness. Now, that's an overly simple maybe example because the word defense is like so simple, but that's a good example because it could be a simple strategy. And what it does is it guides you through many different choices. That's a good example, actually, because a good strategy should provide help in decisions as you make them. Does that make sense? It should help guide you through them.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling, like you come to a point in your life or a point in your, game or a point in your business and you're not sure what to do, that should tell you either you don't have a good enough strategy or you're not clear on what your strategy really is and what's behind it.
Yeah. I like the idea of the defensive. And so I want to dig in on that just for a little bit because I'm a big into the NBA fan, all of that. There's only ever been one team in the history of the NBA. This is going to sound really crazy, but it's true. Actually, it might be more than one, but there's only one modern team, I should say, that has won the NBA championship being number one in defense. And that's the Pistons of 2004, the Detroit Pistons. So you could say their strategy was built around defense. And the reason it was is because of the players they had. All of their players, well, maybe not all of them, but the majority of their players were better at the better strategy for them was defense rather than offense. They weren't going to score a lot of points. So their goal was to hold the other team to less points so they could win the game. Because obviously in basketball, you win by scoring more points than the other team. So there's two parts to that strategy, which I know that sounds basic, but when you think about it, it does change how you look at the game.
I see. You're saying, yeah, you could score more points or you could work to keep them to less. Either one achieves you scoring more than them.
Exactly. There's two ways to approach that. Yeah. Whereas like Showtime Lakers would score 120 points. So if they didn't score 100 points, they were going to lose the game because their defense was horrible. So again, coming back to strategy, there's a piece of this too. Why, getting back to your thought here, like reasons why do I do things? Some of that could be, these are the players I have. They're good at defense. That's their specialty. So we're going to choose a defensive strategy. And this is like so broad strokes. Like obviously there's a lot more strategy that goes into the NBA, but
hey, this is just a casual conversation about strategy.
But if knowing who your players are. So I think business for a second here, if I could go that direction for a second, maybe as a leader on your team or a CEO or whoever, whatever, you have people under you.
Yeah.
You might need to take a step back and you might have to say, well, these are the players I have, so to speak. These are the people I have to work with. And that could sound negative, but I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way. It's just the reality of the situation. You can't
limitations. There's always limitations.
You can't just fire everyone and start over. Of course you can, but that would take time. You got to find the right people, go through the whole interview process. So there's a point of like, these are the people I have. And a reason for choosing a strategy might be these people that I have. I don't know how that plays in, but again, reasons for choosing things. One of those reasons might be the limitations. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you're hitting on is there are many different. So yeah, this is actually really helpful because what you're showing is what's even behind the strategy, right? So there's the choices you make. One level up from that is why you're making that choice. One level up from that is the reasons behind the strategy you chose. And so that's more of a sort of a broader, higher level thing. And we are going to get into that. Why would you choose a defensive strategy versus an offensive strategy? And how do you know that you should choose one versus another one? And that's something we're going to get to later in the this process, whether it's a book or a system or whatever this turns into. But it's interesting because it shows what we don't mean by strategy. So those reasons are not strategy. They're other things, and we will cover them, and they influence the strategy, but that's not what we mean when we say strategy. So I think that's a helpful defining what it's not, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's another level up? I was just thinking, I was starting to type out like the different levels here, and I have this sense that there's even maybe another level up. Like, I wonder, well, for one thing, I wonder if the reasons piece is actually a little higher. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I might say it like there are levels within the why. Like reasons is a broad category that has sub levels inside of it. So like we'll talk about rules. I think you had a whole section in your outline about rules. So Rules is another interesting one because there's the rules of the game. Like, let's take basketball.
Yep.
There are the rules of the game that influence and dictate your strategy to some extent. But there's also rules, are your own rules that you make for yourself, like your own values, the things that you think are important. Like in my example of college, like I was choosing my family as a certain rule. That's a rule that I will invest a certain amount of time in my family. And actually, I think we've got a whole section. Maybe it's better to pull it up at this point, or maybe we're going too deep on this. But there's a whole section where
let's just touch on it real briefly. The other rules that we talk about are moral rules. Like you're not going to betray somebody. You're not going to break the law. Those kinds of rules play into it as well. And honestly, they're similar to limitations, but different in that you set them where they come from. Yeah. These are things you set. It's similar to the rules of the game. Those aren't things you set. So maybe the rules of the game, because limitations you don't set. You're kind of given those. Like the money you start with, the people you have, the situation you're in, you have some control, but largely it's not controlled by you. It is what it is. Same with the rules of the game. However, these rules we're talking about, I call them lines, because they're drawn by you. So it's moral lines, like you were just referring to. I don't know what you would call that, but like health lines, maybe healthy things. Like I'm not going to neglect my family. I'm going to, another big one for me recently. I'm going to take care of my body. Like I want to leave time in my schedule for me to still be able to work out and eat healthy. Sleep could be a line. So those are largely dependent on you. You can make those decisions yourself, but they are also they lead to different choices, getting back to where we're talking about with strategy. Those lead to different choices maybe than because some people might have different lines. They might not care about their family, or maybe they don't have a family. So that's not a thing that even enters the conversation.
Sure. Well, and there's also a difference between like something you won't violate versus something you want to be known for. Like you might say, I think we're getting into the weeds. I think I want to save this for later, but let me hit this and then I'll move on. You might say honesty. Well, listen, I'm not going to be a cheater. I'm not going to be a cheater is different than saying I want to be known as the honest person. And so like, I'm not going to be a cheater would be like, I'm not going to steal from you, but I want to be known as the honest person would be like, I'm going out of my way, like to correct every misconception. And I'm going to like, if you gave me 10 extra cents of change, I knew somebody who did this. He got 25 cents extra change back from the store. He would literally walk back. He was sitting in his car. He'd walk back into the store and hand them the quarter back. And I'm thinking, not only is that like wasting your time, it's actually worth more. That quarter is actually worth less to that store than the time it took them to take it from you, open the drawer, put it in. Like what, I don't know if that makes sense. So, but he wanted to be known that way. That was a value he had. So we'll come more into that later. The other thing I wanted to mention, getting back to sort of the misconceptions people have, and maybe let me pause before I do that. Is that, how do you feel like we've defined it? Do you think that is a good definition?
No. I think it is correct. I'm not sure if it's helpful. So I think that we're getting there, and I think everything we're saying is helpful, but I don't think we've defined it in such a way that I would really be able to wrap my head around it if I didn't already know what we're talking about. So I think we got more work to do, but we can keep going. Go ahead and what you were saying about what it isn't.
The thing I wanted to talk about is, it's not so much what it isn't, but I think it's a misconception about strategy, is that people see it in sort of a negative way. Someone might say, I don't have a strategy. I just wing it. I just fly by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And they see that as a positive thing. That's a thing they're doing on purpose. And so in reality, that is a strategy. Like if you, and this is a thing I don't think people understand. Strategy is what's behind the choices you're making. So if what's behind the choices you're making is that you don't want to have a consistent plan, well thought out, that is still a strategy. That is still a reason behind choices you've made, right?
Or choices that it's different kind of choices. Like maybe you're not being as intentional, but it's still based on your strategy that you're doing. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
And usually people think that will lead to them being more successful, right? And that's really the point is, if you're making a choice in such a way that you think it will help you be more successful, that's a strategy. Whether it's written on paper, whether you can even talk about it effectively, you do have a strategy. And that's why I think this is so this topic of helping people think strategically is so important because you're always going to be better at something when you realize you're doing it and when you can think about it and examine it and get better at it versus doing it sort of on accident, sort of like bumping into it, on accident. So a couple analogies on that maybe.
I like that a lot. Yeah, before you get into that, I like that a lot because I do think there is a big piece of this, and it goes back to what we're trying to accomplish with this book and with our channel, channels, which is to say, you need to be more purposeful. I think that's a big piece of what we're trying to say here. Even if you're making the choice to not be purposeful, that is a strategy.
Yeah.
And it can be effective or maybe it isn't depending on, the situation. But even just knowing that your strategy is to not be purposeful.
That's right.
Is still helpful. That's right. Do you want to dig in on that a little?
Yeah, because I do. I think it's helpful to know what you're after and why you're choosing what you're choosing. So let's take say someone's being intentional about not having a really well thought out strategy. Well, why might someone do that? Maybe it's because they value a certain vibe, in their life. Like they want to feel laid back, like they can go with the flow. But that's a strategic choice they've made. That's something they're valuing.
Absolutely.
Right. So
like here's a great example of this. I'm still working through diet and health myself, and my wife and I were both doing a similar diet together. And it's very successful. I've used it in the past and I've lost weight on it. So I was kind of coming back to it, and we had done it for about 2 weeks, and she's like, I don't know if I can do it anymore. So I'm trying to dig in with her on why, cause she had lost weight. I had lost weight. I thought everything was going super well. After digging around, and by digging around, I mean conversations, asking questions, trying to figure out what she's thinking. She finally says, I think I'm just bored. I need more different kinds of food in my diet. And it's not even like she didn't like what we were eating or, because it was somewhat of a keto. So not really a lot of carbs. So you're talking no bread. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which to me, the things that we were eating were good replacements. But to her, she's like, man, I'm just getting bored with this diet. I need more variety in my diet. So then that is kind of go back to what you're saying. That to her is a really important thing. Is she wants variety to be a piece of her strategic diet. If you can, it's crazy to think about it, but that's what we're talking about, is thinking about things like that. So then for her, she's going to create a system and we'll get into systems and stuff later, but if she's going to think through the strategy of weight loss for her, she needs to take that into account. I need a diet that has a lot of variety in it. Otherwise her motivation is going to, she will fail. Her motivation will go away, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I think, that's what it is really, is saying people are valuing something that they feel is opposed to their idea of strategy. So maybe variety, they feel like strategy cannot be in alignment with variety, or they feel like strategy can't be in alignment with, what's the word when you make an impromptu decision? Whatever that's called.
Yeah, like flying by the seat of your pants. Yeah, improvisation is a really good word. Improvisation is a great word.
And in reality, it can be. You just have to make it. A strategy can incorporate whatever you want it to incorporate. There are creative ways to build strategies to allow space for variety, improvisation, changing on the fly.
And there are levels agile. Even where you can say, we're going to plan everything out, but we're going to leave space or time or resources if something changes so that we can change on a dime and capitalize on that opportunity that comes up.
Yes.
That can be built into a strategy. So in one way, it's not even like it has to be one or the other. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, exactly right. And you said something interesting there about planning. I think that's another misconception, is that people think strategy is the same as a plan or planning, and it's not. A plan is laying out the choices you're going to make in advance. So it's really one level below strategy and above the choice you made. But the point there is you can have a strategy and not have a plan. You can have a strategy and intentionally choose not to have a plan. Because again, a strategy is the reasons behind the choices you make and the plans you make, not the actual choices or the plan. So again, part of your strategy might be, I'm not going to plan because I want to let my intuition take over. I want to make the choice in the moment because you think that's going to be more effective at achieving your goal. Because again, it's about getting from where you are to where you want to go, to achieving your goal, to getting what you want, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, because I'm feeling like this reasons thing isn't really the right word. I feel like it's more of the path, good old Matrix, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. But I do feel like the strategy that we're talking about, when we refer to strategy, it is the path. It's how you are getting from where you are to where you are going. That is strategy. The path you take, that can include planning. And I think that's the point you were just making. It can say, oh, I'm not going to plan at all. Well, not planning, you're still going to take a path. You still are going to follow, like, even if you say, I'm going to pick, like, if you're walking in a forest and you're like, I'm just going to take every left turn I see is my strategy. That's a strategy. That's a path you're taking. Or you're going to say, I'm going to roll dice. Every time I see a fork in the road, I'm going to roll the dice, and whatever, if it's a 1, then I go this way. If it's 2, again, that's still part of the path. So maybe it is higher than even that, right?
But use your analogy. That's a good analogy to demonstrate why I don't think the path is the right word, but I'm catching what you're at.
Yeah.
Because it's not the left, the choice to take the left, pick any given left-hand turn you made. That's not part of the strategy.
Yes.
It came from the strategy. So
correct.
The strategy is somewhere beneath the reasons, because I think you're right. I think reasons is the wrong word.
Yeah.
And it's somewhere above the plan. It's a system. It's a system is the wrong word too. It's like it's a way of making choices, which I don't know the word for that. What's the way of making choices? What's the word for that? It's like saying, this is how I'm going to make choices. This is a guiding principle. This is the, I'm stumbling through that, and we might have to come back to this a little bit.
I think you're really close though. Like, guiding principle is a great way of saying it, because like, as you were referring to before, let's keep using my illustration, because I think it's a helpful one, because I do think picturing it as a path you're taking is correct. That is a good way to think about it. But then it's, how are you moving through that path to get to where you're going? But even then, though, I almost would take a step back, because I think there's some assumptions even there, which is there's a start point and an end point, right? Is there an end point? Like we just talked about college, there's an end point, which is I'm going to graduate with a degree. But what if you get into college without an end point? You still have, that's still a strategy, right? But maybe then we would say, yes, but you don't know what your end point is. I guess that's what I'm getting at. What if you don't have an end point? You're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like, and honestly, the reason I'm bringing this up is because that's how a lot of people live their lives. They don't really have an endpoint of like, who do I want to be when I die? Or what do I want to have accomplished? Or what do I want people to have said about me when I die? I don't know. Most people I know never thought of that. They don't have an answer to that question. So I'm not sure if I would have an answer to that question. I
have a couple thoughts on that, but I want to say, I think the more I think about it and the more I hear you talking, I think guiding principles is exactly what a strategy is. It is. And the reason that's sticking out to me is because earlier we said something like a good strategy will help you make choices. And guiding principles help you make choices.
Yep.
It also lands very well because a guiding principle is just beneath your reasons, your whys. Your why helps determine what guiding principles you're going to choose. Right. So having a defensive strategy is a defensive guiding principle. So anyway, I think there's a lot to those words. Getting back to your point, I don't think you can have a strategy if you don't know where you're going, because again, in our definition of strategy is an objective. Well, that's all for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear the rest of this conversation, make sure to subscribe so you get new episodes as they're released. You can also view this content along with visuals on our YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. We'll see you on the next one.